Okay, now it's official. Okay, I'm delighted to introduce Vishal Subramanyan. I first met Vishal when he was 14 years old. I was working as a park ranger in the East Bay, an area with oak woodlands long tended by the Ohlone people and now heavily occupied with suburbanites. This soft spoken teenager with a cracking voice would call our ranger office and ask about bobcat sightings. This made some of the rangers nervous and were concerned he was stalking or harassing the wildlife or asking for privileged information. It was always obvious to me that this was a passionate young man with a genuine curiosity about wildlife and a great respect for their natural existences. Vishal and I both understood that nature is not a museum. People are part of nature and we live and work alongside each other. Vishal was fully aware that people can have negative impacts on wildlife and was intentional about observing without disturbing. His unusually calm and quiet nature made him no more disturbing than a deer that would stop here and there to graze. Fun fact, Vishal and I once witnessed a deer chase a bobcat up a tree, and as far as I know, a bobcat has never run from Vishal. Vishal spent hours and hours and hours out documenting the lives of these bobcats, and it's been gratifying to see him go to university and hone his curiosity and skills to do serious science and conservation work encompassing far beyond the cat family. He's become an ambassador for animals, a strong conservationist, and also, as you'll soon see, an amazing photographer and storyteller. And as a little side note, I believe I talked Vishal into giving his first ever wildlife talk in 2018. I'm really grateful he's agreed to talk to us today. And I'll turn it over to Vishal.
Awesome. Well, first off, thank you, Amy, for the lovely introduction. I'm super grateful for all the support I had from you from a really young age, and it really helped me want to continue down this career path. So thank you. So my talk today is going to be from coast to the mountains, capturing stories of California's wildlife. And I just want to share some of my favorite wildlife stories I've captured over nearly a decade of doing wildlife photography now. And all of these stories will be from right here in California. So first off, I wanted to share a little bit about me. Amy already did a lovely introduction, but I'm a recent UC Berkeley graduate, and I'm a professional wildlife photographer and storyteller. I'm a National Geographic Young Explorer and an Osher Fellow at the California Academy of Sciences. And my job is to take pictures of animals. And how do I do this for a living? And the answer is through partnerships. I work with amazing land trusts, nonprofit organizations, and open space agencies to tell stories about the wildlife that we share our local landscapes with. Some of my clients include California Academy of Sciences, the California Wolf Project based out of UC Berkeley, and local land trusts like Peninsula Open Space Trust and Mid-Peninsula Regional Open Space District. Now, my fascination with wildlife started from a really young age. As a kid, I was always exploring the hills behind my backyard in Fremont, California, in the East Bay area, and I spent a lot of time photographing animals like otters, weasels, badgers, but my heart was always with the bobcats. And I want to talk specifically about one individual bobcat that really shaped my journey as a photographer. This is Notch, and she's one of the first bobcats I ever saw. So this story starts with a different animal, though. I was watching these great horned owls one evening, and a hiker told me they'd seen a bobcat just around the corner. I hiked around, not really expecting to see anything, but then I saw a small gray dot off in the distance. It was the bobcat that had just been spotted, and my photos weren't very good, but I could tell that this bobcat was pregnant. So I came back months later to see if I could find her with some kittens. I ended up finding the bobcat again, and she had this distinctive notch in her right ear, so I named her Notch, and that year she had three different kittens. One evening, I saw her carrying a ground squirrel across the trail into the base of the tree, where these three tiny kittens jumped out, and I got this photo of one of the kittens peering at me just as the light was hitting it, and it was at this moment I was hooked. I started spending basically every free second I had searching for Notch and her family, and I was able to see some pretty cool moments, like this time where she caught this huge ground squirrel to bring back to her kittens. On one Christmas day, I watched as Notch caught two squirrels, then went to the creek to get a drink. I always say it was the best Christmas present I ever received. I got to witness some pretty cool interactions. So in the photo on the left over here, we can see Notch just as she was chased up a tree by a deer. Now, Amy and I witnessed that once together, and I've seen it countless times since. A really fascinating interaction to witness between two species that we share this landscape with. On the image on the right, you can see Notch chased up a tree, this time by a coyote. So she definitely had to deal with her fair share of hostile encounters with other animals on the landscape. Notch was a remarkably efficient hunter. On this day, I saw her dive into the air 6 times with these big, beautiful leaps, and every one of those times she caught a prey item. You know, it's known that predators don't often have the highest success rates, but she seemed to buck that trend every time. Notch's kittens always had the most curious, expressive personalities. These are two kittens of hers that I photographed, the one on the right in 2019 and the one on the left in 2020. And both of them were just so curious about everything around them, allowing for some really beautiful encounters and moments. One of my favorite encounters of Notch I remember I was about to leave the park when I saw Notch sleeping by the side of the trail. And it might have just looked like she was taking a nap, as cats love to do, but this was actually a hunting technique. She'd walk into these fields with ground squirrels, and the squirrels would be alarming and going crazy, but then she would just lay down, take a nap, let the squirrels forget about her. Then she'd wake up and grab one, and that's exactly what she did here. But after catching the squirrel, she actually took it into the creek, and I'd never seen a bobcat in the water like this before, so this was a pretty unique thing to witness. And I always thought they didn't like water, but maybe this photo proves otherwise. One year, we were really lucky enough to find Notch's den and see this 3-week-old blue-eyed kitten peeking out outside of outside of the den, and it remains one of the most remarkable wildlife experiences to date. And exactly 6 months later, I took a photo of that kitten all grown up. This was the last photograph I took of Notch. She crossed the trail in front of me just as she'd done many times before and disappeared into the brush. But this time, she never came back out. Now, it's hard to say what happens when a wild animal disappears, but there's no doubt her legacy lives on. I actually wrote my main college essay to UC Berkeley as a letter to Notch, and her offspring continue to survive in this park and raise their own litters of kittens. This is Blondie, one of Notch's kittens from her very first litter, and Blondie is now 11 years old, which is remarkably old for a wild bobcat, and I've now watched her raise 8 litters of kittens in the same place that she grew up, and I'm hoping for a ninth one soon. Now, after working on bobcats for a while, and I still do work on bobcats, I also wanted to photograph some bigger cats, mountain lions specifically. But mountain lions are not an easy animal to photograph. I spent hundreds of hours hiking looking specifically for them, but I never found them. So I had to turn to a different technique called camera trapping. Now, over here, what you see are the components of a DSLR camera trap. Now, a lot of us are probably familiar with game cameras or trail cameras, which are tools used by wildlife enthusiasts and scientists to monitor wildlife that are around them. It uses the simple technology of a passive infrared sensor connected to a camera to take a photo anytime it detects motion. Now, a DSLR camera trap is similar to this trail cam. It uses very similar technology, except it's just a little higher quality. You're using a DSLR camera and a wide-angle lens, which gives you a bigger sensor size and a higher quality photo, and you're using off-camera flashes to capture color images both day and night. And one of these setups can be pretty complicated to set up in the field. So you can see there's a lot of different moving parts. You've got your camera box, you've got your motion sensor, you've got your flashes, all working in synchrony to capture that perfect image of the animal as it walks through the landscape. Now, as you can imagine, something like this can take quite a bit of time to set up, and you have to manual focus on where you predict the animal to walk. So this means that your sensor has to trigger at the exact right time so that it captures the first image when the animal is in the focal plane. And to kind of perfect this and make sure it's triggering at the right time, you often have to crawl around like a mountain lion yourself. Now, this might look rather silly, but it's an important part of the process. And in fact, I have way more images of me crawling around like mountain lions than I do of actual mountain lions. And as I started setting these camera traps up, I was able to capture these images of all these beautiful animals in the landscape. Of course, there was bobcats, and you know I can never say no to bobcats. This was one of my favorite camera trap images of a
Mhm.
bobcat jumping across the frame.
Wow.
And if you look closely in the back, you can see her kitten in the background.
Oh, yeah.
And I was capturing images of coyotes, foxes, even owls. But the mountain lion images I was going for was eluding me. So I had to learn to read the landscape for clues. So on the image on the left, you can see a mountain lion track, and this track left by the mountain lion is a very clear indicator that this route is used by mountain lions. On the right, you see what is a mountain lion scrape, which is when they kick up leaf litter with the back of their legs, and they use it as a territorial marking. So using this information along with Google Earth to look for topographic pinch points like ridgetops and canyons, I was finally able to identify some good mountain lion locations, areas where there was clear signs of activity across the landscape. So I set up my camera traps there, and I got a butt shot, and another butt shot. In fact, for about 6 months, every time I tried to photograph this mountain lion, it would come, it would come the wrong way. I'd move my camera this way, it would come that way and give me a butt shot. But I kept at it, and eventually I started getting some of the mountain lion images I was hoping for, like this youngster on a ridge at sunrise. I even captured this mating pair of mountain lions, which was something beyond my wildest dreams. I never imagined that I would be able to see something like this. But it didn't always go according to my plan. You see that in the creek? That's my camera trap. I kept my camera in a dry creek bed, and all of a sudden we got inundated with a large rainstorm. My camera, which was sitting in this creek that was now flowing, fell over, and I had a little game camera nearby recording as the mountain lion used my camera as a stepping stone to cross the creek. Talk about insult to injury. One of my friends described this as an expensive wildlife crossing. Funnily enough, this video has way more views than any of my mountain lion photos combined. But eventually, I got that camera back up, and I finally got the photo I was hoping for of that mountain lion crossing the stream just as the sun was setting behind it. Now, you remember that mating pair of mountain lions I showed you? 6 months later, on Valentine's Day, here's what my camera saw.
Did your sound turned off?
I did it on my phone so I could hear it. So I'm
And they
watching on your iPad, but I'm listening on my phone.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
Um, just so you know, we can hear you. If you're able to mute yourself, that would be great.
Oops.
never in my wildest dreams would I ever imagine seeing three mountain lions nursing right in front of my camera, and it still remains one of my favorite wildlife moments to date. Now, my work on mountain lions took me to photograph a completely different kind of animal, and this was my first professional photo assignment, and it was focused on an animal called a mountain beaver, which unsurprisingly does not live in mountains, nor is it a beaver, and they're actually found in Point Arena, which was mentioned earlier. But what my assignment was focused on was on a subspecies of mountain beaver that's found particularly in Point Reyes National Seashore. So Point Reyes National Seashore, just like Point Arena, has its own subspecies of mountain beaver. And my job was to camera trap, photograph and film this subspecies of mountain beaver in high quality for the first time. And we captured a lot of mountain beaver photos and videos. But one of the more remarkable things we found was actually the other organisms that were utilizing mountain beaver burrows. So this is just, these two, a long-tailed weasel and a rabbit, are just two of the 29 different species we captured using mountain beaver burrows. We had everything from, these long-tailed weasels to skunks to even short-tailed weasels, which are really rare in the Point Reyes region. And of course, where there's small mammals, there's predators, so the bobcats and the foxes would frequently visit the mountain beaver burrows. And it was just a really cool way to combine wildlife photography with scientific research to learn this really new thing about this unique organism. So for context, mountain beavers are thought to be one of the most ancient rodent species in the world, and they're the only surviving member of their family, Aplodontiidae, and all other members of this family went extinct over 2 million years ago. And through the study, we were able to learn just how important they are as keystone species in these local ecosystems, when it's a species that's been completely overlooked by science and photography for a long time. While I was working on the mountain beavers, I took a little side quest to a different project. While I was in Point Reyes, I heard about the sighting of a really rare leucistic badger. Now, leucism is a genetic condition that results in a partial lack of melanin production, giving animals a pale appearance like this. And I'd always really been fascinated with animal coloration, so I knew I wanted to find this badger in between my mountain beaver shifts. One day, while I was hiking around on a mountain beaver survey, I noticed some fresh badger sign in a field nearby. I stopped to investigate it, and I had no idea if it was that rare badger that I was looking for, that leucistic badger, but it was enough for me to continue to keep my eye out in this area in case I saw anything. One evening, while I was walking in that field, I spotted this female bobcat. I sat down with the bobcat, watched her as she hunted for a few hours, when she walked right by a rock, or what I thought was a rock when I walked by earlier. But as I took a closer look, I noticed that this rock had fur. It had a slightly pinkish nose. It was that rare badger that I was looking for, and it had just been right in front of me the whole time. Now, as I took this picture, I only got a few photos before the badger disappeared back into its burrow. But I could tell something didn't seem quite right. I'd seen leucistic animals before, and they tended to have this more pale white coloration, but this animal almost had more reddish tones. So I started doing some more research, and I found out that this badger was more likely erythristic. Now, that word was a new term for me, and it's a little bit of a mouthful, but pretty much what it means is that the animal has an overproduction of reddish pigmentation. So it's a genetic mutation that creates this reddish coloration. And erythrism had only ever been documented in American badgers twice before, and it's thought to be a rarer condition than both leucism and albinism. So with this new information, I was more determined than ever to get some more photos of this really one in a million badger. So I decided to spend the next 10 days throughout the entire holiday season sitting in this field from 9 to 5 every single day, hoping to photograph this badger again. And I can tell you how this went, but I'd rather show you. This was me at the start of the 10 days. This was me at the end of it. Needless to say, it didn't quite go as planned, because these American badgers have a really large territory, and it's likely that this field just made up a small portion of this badger's territory. So after 10 days of getting rained on, chased by cows, and just generally being pretty miserable, I decided to go home, recharge my batteries, and try again on the last day of the spring semester before my 2024 semester started at Berkeley. And when I got back to the field, I found him, curled up in a ball, just as I'd seen him the very first time. After waiting for about 4 hours, he finally got up and gave me some of the photos I was looking for. He started walking through the field, digging through for gophers, which is why you can see the little bit of dirt on his face. And I was really able to see that unique coloration firsthand in pictures like this. I ended up getting that perfect photo I was looking for of the side profile of the badger where you could see the color really clearly. And this photo ended up being my first photo in National Geographic. And, growing up, I'd seen photos from Nat Geo of faraway places, but this was a reminder of the power of the stories that we can capture right in our own backyards, because it was this photo of a badger just an hour from where I live that ended up being my first photo in the publication. Now, since this is an Audubon Society, I've got to talk a little bit about birds, so I want to share a story about my favorite bird from Yosemite National Park. Now, in the spring of 2020, just as COVID had hit, I was spending a lot of time exploring in these forests outside of Yosemite National Park, which had very little visitation at the time. And I was looking for these great gray owls. Now, great gray owls are one of the most fascinating birds in my opinion. They have these huge wingspans. They're just really beautiful and ethereal looking. And this subspecies of great gray owl is found only in and around Yosemite National Park in the Sierra Nevada, and they're state listed as an endangered species here in California. So a really remarkable, unique, and endangered bird. And I was really fortunate enough to find a nest of these owls this year. But tragedy quickly struck when I found the male owl dead on the side of the meadow. Now, we don't know what happened to him, but based off the way the feathers were plucked, it's likely that this owl was actually predated upon by another bird, perhaps a golden eagle or a great horned owl. And this happened at a really critical time for this great gray owl family, because the female was on the nest incubating, and it's typically during this time that the male owl provides food to both the female and the new young when the young is hatched. So now this female owl had a pretty monumental task ahead of her. She had to support herself and her chick with no mate to provide any food or any support. And the odds were stacked against her, pretty much everyone agreed. But we watched as she found a hunting route that kept her close to the nest so she could hunt while protecting her chick from ravens and other potential predators. And we were kind of on our toes for about a month seeing if the chick would make it. But a month later, when I came back, here's what I saw. The chick had successfully fledged, and she, against all odds, had raised this chick to survive without any support from her mate. And it was just a reminder of the resilience and adaptability of nature against all odds. Now, the next project I want to talk about are bats, another flying creature. Now, for one of my assignments for Mid-Peninsula Regional Open Space District, I was asked to photograph the only known maternity roost of pallid bats in the San Francisco Bay Area. Every summer, the pallid bats and the Townsend big-eared bat on the left come into this roost in the hundreds, and it's really critical. It's a really critical habitat for them. And I wanted to show how these bats were using this abandoned structure and to show this, juxtaposition between human and wildlife in these shared landscapes. But photographing the bats flying out of a barn window that was 20 feet above the ground was quite the logistical challenge. I spent a week workshopping with my dad and we created this setup, which brought the cameras about 20 feet up on the pole to be eye level as the bats were emerging from the window. And we had no idea if this would work because the way it was working was it was taking a picture every 30 seconds throughout the night. And I just had to hope that a bat flew through in that time frame. But after about a month, we checked the cameras and we ended up capturing a variety of bat photos of showing them utilizing this really important structure. One of the interesting things we found was that the pallid bats like to emerge in pairs. And some of the bats were actually banded from a study that happened nearly a decade ago, showing a remarkable site fidelity to this specific site. These are some more photos we captured of the bats emerging in pairs, and I always love the ones where I could get just like a completely synchronous pose, and like out of hundreds of shots, just one of them would have that, perfectly synchronized pose. And here's another one example of that. And in addition to capturing these pallid bats, sometimes, as much as 4 or 5 of them, we were also able to capture like multiple species using the barn at the same time. Like these two big pallid bats emerging with a much smaller Mexican free-tailed bat. In total, this barn was utilized by 5 different species, of which I was able to capture 4 of them, including these Mexican free-tailed bats, these Townsend's big-eared bats, which are another species of special concern in California, these Myotis bats, and yeah, overall it was just a remarkable way to learn more about the bats and their use of the structure, and test out a new photography technique that I hadn't tried before. Now, the last story I want to talk about is of this little shrew called the Mount Lyell shrew. Now, this might look like a pretty unassuming creature, but what if I told you, until November 2024, this was the only mammal in California that had never been photographed alive? So our story begins with 2 more common rodents. These are a California vole and a deer mice. Now, I was on a field trip for my mammalogy class in UC Berkeley when as part of this class, we were learning how to find, track, and research small mammals. And my friend and I had built this photography setup to photograph some of the small mammals that we captured during this research trip. And while we photographed these 2 animals, the one shrew that had been captured was escaped, and it made us really determined to get a photo of a shrew. And upon doing some research, we found out that the Mount Lyell shrew was the only mammal in California that had never been photographed alive. It's a small shrew native to the High Sierra Nevada, and the fact that it had never been photographed alive was a reminder that there's still just so much to learn about our local biodiversity. And it hadn't even been recorded in 20 years, so nobody knew about the status of the species, nobody even knew what it looked like. So we decided we wanted to go capture the first photographs and learn as much as we could about what might be California's most overlooked and elusive mammal. So we partnered with the California Academy of Sciences and the Museum of Vertebrate Zoology at UC Berkeley to launch an expedition to Boulder Canyon to go and find these shrews. Now, I included a photo of a dead shrew here to show what happens when shrews are researched. Shrews have an so shrews actually are not a rodent. They're an insectivorous species that's a member of the hedgehog family, and they're known to have one of the fastest metabolisms in the animal world. What this means is they can't go more than a couple of hours without eating, otherwise they'll die. Now, a lot of past research done by mammalogists are focused on collecting specimens for natural history museums. So to them, they set out traps at the start of the night, and they'll collect them in the morning. And oftentimes during this time period, the shrews will starve and die. So because of this, the Mount Lyell shrew had likely never even been seen alive, let alone photographed. And we knew we would have to check our traps constantly to ensure the shrew's survival and well-being. So we ended up going for a research expedition in early November. And to make sure that we were able to see and capture the shrews alive, we would check our traps every 2 hours throughout the night, meaning throughout the course of 4 nights, we only slept 8 hours total. And this was in about 15-degree weather. And throughout this process, we were able to capture 18 different shrews, including 6 Mount Lyell shrews. And this was the most that had been captured on any research expedition, and a great reminder that they were still here and present on the landscape. We were able to learn some amazing information about their behavior, including the fact that they often cache food to save for a later day, or in their case, probably a later hour, because they eat so much. And we were able to photograph all of these shrews and collect data on all of them, and eventually got the quintessential photo we were hoping for of the Mount Lyell shrew. And this was the first photograph ever of this species, and it ended up being the most popular photograph that we've ever taken. In fact, this photo was featured in CNN, The Guardian, LA Times, and CBS, and it was a reminder that sometimes we need to stop and pay attention to the smaller, overlooked creatures of our world. While, nature has its glory hogs like the mountain lion and the tiger, it's important to pay attention to these smaller, overlooked creatures. And through this project, we were able to bring to the spotlight a creature that, without active conservation efforts, could completely disappear in this century due to climate change. And now it was brought from the radar of no one to the eyes of millions, and that's the power of photography and storytelling. So, some of the things I'm working on in my future work include documenting overlooked species like the Mount Lyell shrew and the mountain beaver. We did a project working to document the Sonoma tree vole, which is another really cool, elusive California species. I'm also working on projects around human-wildlife coexistence, how wildlife is adapting to, rapidly changing landscapes, and a lot of my bobcat work has centered around this. And habitat connectivity. When animals cross roads, they get hit by cars, and these big freeways that we've put through our landscape really sever and fragment habitat. So documenting habitat connectivity projects to restore connectivity to the landscape. And I'm also hoping to make more documentary films going forward. And I think that's it for me. Thank you so much for listening, and I'm happy to answer any
Oh,
questions.
well, we missed half an hour of it.
So feel free to put questions in the chat, or I think we could also go for some questions if people want to briefly unmute to ask their question. And I'm not sure what the clacking sound is. That's not your headset, is it, Vishal?
Oh, maybe it is.
Oh,
Let me be careful.
There are some questions already in the chat. Did you see that? There's a couple of questions in there. Okay, let's see what was before this. It was about badgers. Do you find them normally sleeping on top of the ground like that? That seemed very unusual.
Oh yeah, so this badger I found a couple of times doing that. I can't say I've seen other badgers do that, but I've also only seen like three badgers. So I don't know if it's a usual behavior or
I
not,
say
but
more about the Badgers. I've never seen one.
I consider myself very lucky to have seen that many. But this for this badger, almost every time I found it, it was like that. So I imagine it was normal, at least for that individual. And I see a question about mountain beavers as well. Do I remember hearing there is an unusually large tick that is found with them? So it's actually a flea, and it's one of the most interesting relationships in the natural world, in my opinion, because there's an animal called the mountain beaver flea that lives exclusively on the mountain beaver. It can't live off anything else, and it's also the largest flea in the world. So
Wow.
it's a pretty one of just those weird nature things where like how does the largest flea in the world come to exist on such a primitive and elusive species? Um, I don't know, but it's definitely pretty fascinating, and hopefully one day I get to photograph the flea because I'd be very interested in that.
I recently heard about if there's an encounter between a skunk and a mountain lion, that the mountain lion stays away, that the skunk can chase the mountain lion because the mountain lion doesn't want to get skunked.
I don't I know that in the past mountain lions have been seen predating on skunks, so I think that interaction would probably vary depending on the individuals and what the circumstances are. Like I'm sure that this interaction happens as well. But like an example I like to use for cases like this is, we've seen a lot of us have probably seen the instances of coyotes and badgers kind
Hmm.
of palling around together, but a lot of times their interactions can be hostile as well. So I imagine for mountain lions and skunks, it can be a similar thing where sometimes a mountain lion doesn't want to get sprayed and just leaves, and sometimes the
It almost
mountain
looked
lion
like
could hunt the
somebody
skunk.
else's hands.
I'm sorry?
I'm going to mute a few folks. If you're trying to ask a question, feel free to unmute. But I'm sorry, Vishal, what were you saying?
Oh, just that, yeah, but when these interspecific interactions happen, it can probably vary each time on what the interaction looks like. So one example I have of that is I showed that photo of the bobcat and the badger together. But the last time I saw the badger, I actually watched it chase that bobcat away. Like it was running full speed, and the cat jumped over the fence and disappeared. And that interaction took place too far away for me to take photos. But it was, every time I saw that bobcat and the badger in the same space, their interaction was a little bit different.
I was very, I was very interested in the deer chasing the bobcat up the tree. And you saw that a couple of times, you said, or several times where you saw deer chasing bobcats up trees?
Yeah, I've seen deer chasing bobcats several times just like across different locations, and it's again that's something that can vary. So there was one time I was walking down the trail, you know, and I saw five deer like staring in a particular direction. So I walked that way and I turned the corner and there was a bobcat sitting right there. So those interactions can like always vary, but I have seen deer being hostile towards bobcats a lot. I've seen them chase bobcats into trees a couple times.
Mhm.
There was one time recently I was watching a mom bobcat and her two kittens, and then there was a deer and a fawn nearby, and the deer was not happy about the bobcats being there. So the deer chased all three bobcats, and the bobcats just split and ran in different directions. So that was something really interesting to witness. But sometimes they ignore each other, and sometimes the deer are really hostile towards the bobcat. Our bobcats here are definitely not big enough to hunt deer, and that's something I've never seen them try to do.
Yeah, and deer have pretty sharp hoofs.
Hmm.
Hmm.
Yeah, yeah. Mm. I've seen a fox get chased by turkeys up a tree. Yeah, a gray fox. Yeah.
Turkeys can be pretty feisty. I've had them chase me a couple times.
Oh, wow. Oh my gosh. Oh, goodness.
That's great.
I got to say that Mount Lyell's shrew has got to be the cutest of all the shrews, right? Are they
Well,
always fluffy, or you just got a picture of a prize winner there?
well, the interesting thing is the shrews are fascinating because they can really diversify in a place in terms of the number of species. So where we were trapping shrews, there are six different species found, and we caught four of them, and three of them looked identical. Like you couldn't tell them apart. So we actually had to do genetic analysis of the shrews we captured to realize that we photographed the right shrew. So we didn't even know that we'd photographed the Mount Lyell shrew until 3 weeks later when we ran a genetic analysis. So we had to photograph every shrew that we caught because we didn't know which one could be the Mount Lyell shrew. So they all look pretty similar and all look pretty cute.
No, I know I have another question about Aplodontias, the mountain beavers, because they're such just really seem like such cool creatures. So you said there's two different subspecies, the Point Reyes and the Point Arena ones are two different subspecies, right?
Yeah, and in total there's six different subspecies. So there's
Oh,
Point Reyes and Point Arena are the subspecies that are most at risk because they're completely isolated from other populations. So those two populations are similar in the sense, they're both found in these coastal ecosystems and they're both kind of completely sheltered off from other populations. So like, Point Arena, I don't know how many miles north it is of Point Reyes, but they're very far apart.
yeah.
And the nearest population to the Point Reyes population is the Point Arena population. So there's like no connectivity at all between those different populations. So both those two are at like specific risk of extinction just because of how isolated they are. And then there's other subspecies, like there's a Humboldt subspecies. There's a subspecies that goes into Sierra, which is the only non-coastal subspecies. And then there's also subspecies that extend through Oregon, Washington, and maybe the southern part of British Columbia. I'm not too sure about that.
Do they like the same kind of habitat? I mean, it seems like where they live in Point Reyes, isn't it real ferny, like lots of fern hillsides?
Yeah, yeah. So the Point Reyes mountain beavers, like they eat a variety of things, but the bulk of their diet is sword fern. So you'll find them almost exclusively in areas with sword fern. And that's like another really interesting trait that, kind of shows their very like, ancient lineage because ferns are not like a very nutrient dense food. But mountain beavers are able to eat them when basically no other species in that landscape can. So yeah, very ferny. And then like in the Sierra Nevada, like they're in like elevations of 6, 7,000 feet, but they're found in like wet meadows. So I think the one constant is that they need moisture, and that's one of the main threats with climate change, particularly in a place like Point Reyes, is climate change will impact the fog dynamic, making it, making it possible that these birds will no longer have enough moisture for them to survive.
Oh, interesting. Your photography is absolutely fantastic.
Thank
And
you.
there's quite a few comments like that in the chat. Yeah, it's wonderful.
Vishal, do you have any animals on your bucket list you have yet to photograph that you would like to?
Um, I was I was talking about that Sonoma tree vole. I did get a couple of photographs of it, but I want to do a much better job. To me, they're one of the most fascinating animals in California because there's this vole, which is like normally a ground-dwelling species that is just completely adapted to live in arboreal environments, and they can eat up to 2,000 Douglas fir needles a night, which is again like a very unusual food source. And they're like bright orange red, and it's just this like really unique animal ecologically. They're important indicators of the health of our old growth forest ecosystems in California. So, and filming their natural behavior is really difficult just because of these environments that they're found in. So we tried setting up a couple of camera traps way up in the canopy, and we got some footage, but it wasn't what I was hoping for. So I need way more camera traps and way more time the next time I try.
Maybe some platforms between trees, pretty high up, aren't they?
Yep, they can be anywhere from like 20 feet to 100 feet up. So we set
Uh,
up one of our cameras like at close to 100 feet up in the canopy.
And are you physically climbing, or do you have like an ascender type thing?
We like put ropes. We hired an arborist and we put ropes into the tree and we climbed the trees with the senders. But placing cameras in the trees was logistically challenging. You know, you've got these huge diameter trees, and the cameras are attached with these ratchet straps, and these are big, pelican cases with cameras in them. So it would take us 9 hours to set up one camera. Um, but we learned a lot, and we would approach it in a different way next time.
Mhm.
Continued education. Yeah.
Mm. Okay.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your stories with us. I know a lot of folks ended up coming on kind of late, so good news, it has all been recorded, and give us a day or two, and we'll have this up on Peregrine Audubon's YouTube channel.
Yeah, thank
That's
you, Amy,
great.
for that.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
thank you for getting this wonderful speaker for us. Good luck with all your projects.
Thank you.
And when you get some good footage of the tree voles, you'll come back and show us it, right?
Totally, yeah. We can have a
Okay,
tree vole focused presentation.
awesome. All
Thanks.
right. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you. This has been great.
Bye-bye.
Good work, Amy. Thank you.
She heard that.
All right. Bye, everyone. I'm going to close the meeting.